All right, right off the bat, we just want to apologize for moving your cheese. I realize that we're upsetting your podcasting routine by publishing today. Today would be 16th day of August. So we are in day one, full day one of election mode here in Canada. So what we thought we would do is use this platform just the same way we began it. And so John Wright and I will be with you right through until election night on the podcast. We're back to doing the daily. It all began, John, I guess, the first day that the writs were issued in Ontario, and that election final ultimately saw Doug Ford elected as premier here in Ontario. So we have rebranded the Ontario Politics Podcast just for the sake of this writ period here in Canada federally as the WRIT Race. So welcome back to the WRIT Race. And John, I think, it was one of those things where I sent you a note this morning. Do we resurrect this thing or not? I think it's required. I think it's necessary because what we learned, I think, from doing the very first edition of this was that it was like drinking water out of a fire hose with the amount of stuff that was out there on a daily basis. And no offense to our media friends out there, but it becomes more and more difficult to get analysis of what's going on the campaign trail. And from your perspective, particularly your perspective, your ability to look at what the numbers are telling us and what the trends are telling us and what the attitudes of Canadians are telling us. So, buckle up. Here we go. It's 36 days and we'll need a long drink after this is all done.
I think the other thing that we have the ability to do is not talk about anything from a partisan perspective. There are other podcasts out there that do have players who are very political. I'm not, but there are also other people who we might bring on to share that voice, share those insights, and they can kind of come in and come out, which gives them some variety over the next 36 days as to what we're seeing out there collectively. I think the best thing that this podcast can do is that we can stand back once a day and kind of look at the whole landscape and have that nonpartisan assessment, yes, using numbers here and there, but find the theme, maybe find what's missing, point out what we want to see tomorrow or over the course of the week, and that's what I'm going to enjoy the most.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you and I and Keith Leslie, when we've been doing the On the Ledge segments on a weekly basis, we've talked a lot about how this pending federal election, we saw it coming a mile away, was going to affect what goes on provincially. So I think, on Fridays, for example, Keith will join us and we'll talk about how this is playing out at a provincial level. Ontario clearly is going to be the battleground again. And you will know, you can probably name the 3 or 4 ridings that are really going to make the difference as this thing moves forward. So they'll be the ones to watch. But Keith's got a good perspective because they're just gone through a provincial election in Nova Scotia. They'll be voting tomorrow. And don't think for a minute that, there's going to be aspects of that will play in Atlantic Canada. So we'll be able to pull the thread through on a number of levels. Ultimately, though, and I know you're going to come around to this, the whole issue in this campaign is what the hell's the ballot question? I mean, sometimes it's really easy. Is it COVID? And if so, then why did we need an election? Because we're still in the middle of COVID. It's not as if the election can necessarily solve anything around COVID, considering the programs and the work that this government has already done. And the Prime Minister admitted right off the bat, there's no sense that Parliament isn't working. There's no sense that his agenda is being stalled. So what really is the ballot question here?
Well, and I think that the first questions after his press conference at Government House that the Prime Minister received from Tonda McCharles were the beginning of the campaign. Why are you doing this now? Mm-hmm. And what's the reason for doing it? And it just kind of set a tone for the rest of that press conference. And I think what's surprising about all of this is that there is no ask, there is no issue other than we need to get a mandate to do more of what we were doing. That seems to be it. We need to have a full mandate uninterrupted for 4 years to keep doing this. And I was struck by the Prime Minister saying, and we're going to have a consultation, and I want the opposition leaders to have their say. I don't know any campaign where the leader of a party who wants to achieve a majority government has turned to his opposers and said, hey guys, why don't you join in and let me know what you think. I mean, it's just, there's something missing from this campaign, and I think that goes back to why we're having it. There's nothing resolute. I mean, the only thing that I think may cause a problem, at least in the short term, is that the Prime Minister was delayed coming out of Government House, I'm sure, because he was getting a briefing on Afghanistan, because it was basically melting away as he was inside trying to, dissolve the government with the Governor General. That is a big wild card. He can't control that. We're already getting texts and videos from Kabul and from other places where people who helped Canadians, people who were at the embassy there, people who were interpreters for us, are leaking out their terror-filled calls for us to help them. And we sent one plane in and out, even though there were many who had been in that theater who were crying out for help a month ago. This could be the daily circumstance for at least the first week or two that the government has to work with, because juxtapose that with Boris Johnson in the UK, which has called Parliament back to deal with it, and the President of the United States, who has been on television talking to the American public saying it's a serious issue, but we've got plans to deal with it, and we got nothing. So I just find that sort of stuff can fill an empty agenda, and I sense that we've got a bit of an empty agenda at the moment, because I don't know. You and I know that if you don't have a big agenda or issue or ask going into a campaign, then that void's going to be filled by something else, and oftentimes by something you can't control.
So two things on that then, because, in the past, and we debated on this podcast whether or not it made more sense, at least provincially, for example, for the Liberals to be coming out and saying, we're not even going to talk about COVID because it's going to be rear view mirror. We're going to look forward in terms of something that's visionary. How do we look at the lessons learned from COVID? How do we stand this economy back up? Let's not play the blame game in the rear view mirror. So that's one thing that I think we're probably going to see. We're already getting hints of that from Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives. They just dropped this entire tome on the desk today, and it's their entire campaign platform, and which is lately in a modern time kind of unusual. I mean, they kind of pick and choose their spots, and they'd have a plank here or there, but this is the entire thing. So to me, to your point, all of a sudden that's something that they can plant a flag and say they own this now. And then we add Afghanistan to that. This might have become far more competitive just overnight. And I'd be curious to see, when you start doing polling on this, what the effect of Afghanistan is.
Well, and most of the polling companies out there are credible. There's some, one of these days we can go into the bias of the panels themselves, not the people, but the panels and how they're constructed, because you oftentimes get a group of pollsters at the beginning of a campaign that show that the Liberals are ahead, and there's like a group of them, and then you get another group that shows that the Conservatives are ahead. And that's a bias which is oftentimes not adjusted for in the early days of a campaign dealing with the panels that they're drawing their sample from. But if you look at Nick Nanos from Nanos Research, who rolls the polls every night and has been very accurate in the last campaigns, and you look at Léger out of Quebec, who also has been very accurate in the final days of the campaign at least, Nick Nanos was seeing a 5-point slide for the Conservatives last week. Not 3 weeks ago, last week, and that was where the silence kind of was. Remember, they were talking about the election about 2 weeks ago, and then there was kind of dead silence. I didn't even know whether they were going to call it or not, but that's a 5-point slide. And the question is, where did it go? So 4 points went to the Conservatives and 1 point went to Jagmeet Singh. And what I wonder at the moment from it, we can always talk substantively about the platform, which I think is a good thing, where they've dropped on this 5-point, because it's easily explainable. 5 points, elect us, we want to be the adult in the room at the end of this to try and move us forward. Here's what we have. Yes, we'll get people vaccinated, but this is where we're going. I mean, I think that's important. But the Liberals are prepared with all of their armaments like a battleship to hit over at Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives. That's where they think the fight is going to come. I actually think that it may come the other way. I think that people in this country, and this is speculation based on some of the polling that I've worked on and seen, a lot of people don't like the Conservatives for their stand on a few issues. Aaron O'Toole may overcome that because he's a new personality, and actually the second day was better than his first day, just in terms of how he presented himself. But the Prime Minister has got this, he's got a glow around him where he's accumulated, the blackface and the, you experience things differently, and all of the ethics commissions where thank you for your results, but I see it differently. Like all of those things, how he speaks, what he does, and people basically say, on that COVID thing, you were doing your job. Like that's what you're supposed to do. So good luck for you. And all those agreements you put in the province for daycare? Yeah, well, they're already baked in. So what are you going to do for me next? Like there's a lot of that. But I think if you don't like the Conservatives, and if you're left of center, even a Liberal who goes, I really think we should get a change. I don't want to punish him, and I don't want Aaron to get a majority government, then you might have people move over 4 or 5 points out of the Liberals and move over to Jagmeet Singh. If that happens, it's a minority controlled by the Conservatives, but it's brought about by being outflanked on the left as opposed to the right. So we're in such a small time frame that there's very little room for correction. There's very little room to kind of move that battleship into a different formation. And I think the Prime Minister, if he gets some issues that are beyond his control and his messaging, it may affect the entire time that he's in the water with that battleship.
So let me pick up on two things there, and I really want your perspective on this then based on what you've just said. This morning I heard two pundits on News Talk 1010 talk about the performances and what had happened over the weekend in terms of the announcements of the election. And there was much made of Aaron O'Toole not being forthcoming and answering, properly or at all clearly, if at all, the question around mandating vaccines. Later in the day, the War Room came out and clarified, here's what we're going to do about vaccines. Matt Gurney made the point, that was a rake that they put down in front of themselves, stepped on it squarely, hit them right between the eyes, they got the bump on the forehead, the whole 9 yards. But his thought on this was, that was a War Room that was prepared to be flexible and nimble and change right away. We realized, okay, we misread that, here's where we are, and now we pivot and we move on. It indicated to me that we're going to have to see a lot of that, because I think at one point, it might have been Jim Warren on earlier talking about this as well, saying, it's a 36-day campaign, but really, it's a 2-week campaign. This is going to be an all-out sprint because people are going to be preoccupied between now and Labor Day with, finishing off the holidays and all those sorts of things. We're really not going to pay attention until we get to those final 14, 20 days-ish of the campaign. And that's going to concentrate it even more. And so if you're already locked in and having difficulty, to use your analogy, of turning that battleship around, that space becomes more confined when you look at it through that lens.
Yeah, and I totally agree. There's two things which happened on Monday which are really important to see and contrast with. And again, I just want to focus on the Conservatives and the Liberals for a moment. Justin Trudeau and his team were having a press conference about highlighting what they'd done for Canadians. So rear view mirror, that's what they were doing. Aaron O'Toole, yes, there was a problem with the vaccine, but changed the channel and turned up the volume. They dropped a 5-point, plan right on the desk, and they're already into it, and they're having their own virtual town halls or whatever you want to do, but they're out there with something moving forward as opposed to something looking back. And I contrast this by saying, here the Prime Minister is out talking about, what we've done for the country as opposed to what you're going to do for the country, and I think that's going to cause a problem for him. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, I really don't think this vaccination issue is going to last very long at the door. I mean, I think that there will be other substantive issues that come about, but Jagmeet Singh is also important to watch. He ended up in Toronto, friendly crowd, out talking about, taxing the rich, doing a few other things that, you sort of go, most of the people who are going to vote are not rich, so maybe that's not a bad idea. But again, this is a Prime Minister who controls the agenda, controls the timing, controls what he wants to do, has chosen to do it now when people we're about to maybe get a fourth wave coming in because of school kids or whatever. And there doesn't seem to be a reason that he's going out to get reelected, except look what I did for you, as opposed to what I can do. It seems like a very hollow campaign, and I think the Conservatives may, on the first day, Dave, if we're doing this day by day, I think Erin O'Toole is ahead right now in terms of moving things forward as opposed to looking in the rearview mirror.
So let's just finish on this. Your advice then, would it have been better for the Prime Minister to say, we're not going to call an election now, we're going to call the House back, introduce a throne speech that would have outlined what you're talking about, the move forward. Here's the more we're going to do for you. Frame it that way. Give them your 5-point plan in the form of a throne speech. And then let the Conservatives and the NDP vote on it. And if they vote you down, we're going to the polls. If they don't, you have the mandate for the next 2 years.
The answer is yes, but we don't know what we don't know. I mean, there are some things about that are before the courts. Remember that the government has sued the speaker for taking them to court to find out some things about what happened at the virus lab out in Winnipeg and the 2 Chinese people that went home and whatever. And so maybe there's something there. Maybe there's another thing that they want to get ahead of. Maybe they thought, you know what, we should do this before the 4th wave comes. So let's make it short, get it over with, and move on. But I think you're absolutely right. They could have just introduced the throne speech, said we're going in the spring. And we're going when we get past this, but power is power, and we still hold it, and we can make decisions, and we can bring the agenda forward. They're jeopardizing that by doing what they're doing right now, and we'll see what Canadians think. But not a great start for the Prime Minister on the first day, and I would give the second day right now to Erin O'Toole, and we'll see what the third day brings.
All right, well, we'll be back at it. We'll pick it up tomorrow right here on the WRIT Race. And if you like what you hear, feel free to subscribe to the show, share it, and leave us a comment. We're clearly interested to hear what you have to say about this. So John Wright, Dave Trafford, this is the WRIT Race. It's an Eye Contact production.
Oh, short and sweet.